Hey, we're back again for my second least anticipated talk because nobody wants to talk about data in a downturn, but I think it's the bitter pill that we're all going to have to take, and I'm glad that somebody's addressing the topic. We have a brilliant data professional here, a guy who has come up from like has a massive library of knowledge about marketing analytics and web analytics. And now he runs his own data consultancy called Sawtelle Analytics. I'd love to hear the naming behind that place if you can for us. He loves trying out new products and helping growing startups. He recently moved to oh yeah, he's a consultant now. So with no further ado, it's Stephen Ebrey with his talk Data in a Downturn. Please tell us. Oh, I got to ask. We're doing questions about summer before every one. So
Mhm.
you just recently moved to consulting, and it just kind of happened to coincide with summer. Were you just doing this so you'd have like a fun, easy summer, or just to get away from work?
I honestly, and sounds like a humble brag, but like 2 days into it, I went from like stress that I wasn't gonna have enough work to like stress that I might have too much work. So I don't know that it's actually gonna be that fun of a summer. Well, it'll be okay, but I live in LA, and LA is actually a more of a fall and spring place anyway. Summer's a little too hot. Winter, the days are a little too short, but like fall and spring are fantastic here.
Awesome. Well, hey, Steve, I'm excited. Well, I'm sort of excited. Whatever. Like, lay it on us, man. Uh, Good luck with the talk, and we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Thanks, Trevor. So yeah, this talk is going to be about how to save money and weather a downturn. Um, so about me, I spent 15 years in gaming, advertising, and e-commerce, leading QA, operations, product, and data teams. Most of that was at like VC-backed startups, which are the type that are really having trouble raising new rounds of funding right now. And some of my favorite data tools are DBT, Looker, and Census. If you are at, a huge Fortune 500 company, you may not have all these same issues, but maybe some of this is still relevant to you. I'm actually really curious to know from the people that work at, massive companies if they're having any of these issues. So let me know. But certainly in the companies that I work with, CEOs and CFOs are all asking, how is your team helping me? And does it need to be spending as much money as it is? Um, why save money? Well, when funding is really plentiful, I found like cost savings projects are not that sexy on a data team's roadmap. Everyone just wants like more integrations, more features, um, fun stuff. But I think even when your company is doing well, it is important to devote some time to cost savings. If your company is doing well, it helps your equity, helps your argument for promotion. Let's say your company is trying to keep budgets flat. A lot of companies right now are, doing small layoffs. It's not really at the point yet where it's saving a lot of money, but it's at least like helping, pay for the raises they probably had to give everyone else for inflation. Um, Saving money can help you hire anyway. If you can say, hey, we saved 70 grand on this project, that justifies a new hire. It could also get you approval for a cool new tool. Like let's say you reduce budget on one tool and then that lets you get money to pay for another. And then the worst case scenario, your company is trying to cut costs, more of like a Coinbase type situation where you're really cutting costs. Hopefully, if you've saved money recently, that will make you less worried about your own job security and may help you save a team member's job, which is always one of the most gratifying things you can do. Um, One important thing is don't think of money as just costs paid to vendors. Um, and also don't necessarily think of it as just the total annual salary of your data team. One thing is actual cost of employees is probably like 50% higher than salary because of payroll taxes and benefits. And also like you should really combine those things into a cost of a project. So let's say, for example, your marketing team wants to integrate TikTok ad data. Um, and I'm not saying that these tools are always ranked this way for every company, but let's say at your company, you can get that integration done a lot faster with Fivetran. I know Fivetran has a open source DBT model for TikTok, so maybe that saves you a lot of time. If Fivetran is going to charge you $5,000 a year to bring in that data, but it's only 2 weeks of work, you're essentially paying $15,000 for the first year of TikTok data. So even if Stitch is cheaper and it's going to be $2,000 a year to bring in that data, if it's going to take 4 weeks to do that integration, you're paying $22,000 for that first year. And let's say that your team has Airflow set up and they say, hey, we can just do a custom integration. It'll take us about 8 weeks. That's essentially $40,000 that you've spent on that. And that means that it would take Stitch 4 years to pay off and 6 years for the custom integration to pay off. Again, these numbers are going to be different for every company. Maybe your company has custom integrations down really, really well, and it wouldn't take that long. But just make sure that you do this math and that you're not just assuming that the cheapest vendor is always the cheapest way to do a project. My experience is that I've worked with a lot of teams that want to be at the head of the pack. When times are good, it's really, really hard to hire and retain talent. And ambitious teams that want to do cutting edge work, you have to throw them a bone and let them do some cutting edge projects. Even if it doesn't make sense from a pure ROI perspective to build something from scratch or, integrate a tool that's very new and still a little bit buggy or something like that. You may have to do some of these projects just to keep your team engaged and, make sure that they're not looking around at other companies. But we're in a time when you should really think about drafting. Anyone who's played Mario Kart knows that you can really get a speed boost by following what other people have done. And I think your team's incentives are different now. They're probably care a little bit less about being cutting edge, and they care a little bit more about knowing that their team is really valued, and the marketing and finance and product teams love you, and your jobs are safe. So take advantage of the incentive shift to focus on delivering as much value as quickly as possible by taking advantage of who's gone before. Some different ways to ask for help and rely on other people is more on the cost savings side. I recommend asking your DB vendor for help. So for example, I was at Omaze for a long time until recently switching out to consulting. And our Snowflake reps were always super helpful in terms of not helping us not waste credits. So they would provide recommendations for things like how many credits to renew for, what to set the warehouse size at, things like auto suspend, multi-clustering. It's much easier to just ask them and have a conversation than try to figure that stuff all out from scratch. And do experimentation that maybe ends up wasting some money. Another great way to get help is use our awesome Slack spaces. So obviously we're all in OA Club. I bet most of us are in the DBT Slack and the locally optimistic Slack as well. And if you're just lurking, try actually asking for questions. I think people love sort of when they've solved a unique problem and they get to talk about it. And most of us are not in competitive companies. So there's not a lot of downside to helping each other out. So I've definitely got a lot of, very helpful tips from these various Slack groups. This one I'm a little biased on, so I'm not going to push on it too hard. But consultants can actually save money if they're helping you do weeks and weeks of work in a very short amount of time because they've already done a tool. So at Omaze, we used a consultant both to set up DBT and to help with our snowplow migration. And it would have just taken way more time and cost way more money to try to figure all that stuff out ourselves. And then this last one is, I've mentioned it before, but there's a lot of open source DBT packages out there. And take advantage of those. You don't have to use the entire thing. A lot of times I just kind of reference parts of it, but it does cut down on my time, even if I'm developing my own DBT model for a particular integration. And then think about establishing SLAs for custom work. So for example, I deal with the marketing a lot, and they test out lots of little channels. And sometimes they just test, $5,000 on a channel, and it doesn't really work. And it wouldn't be a waste of time for me to have integrated that data. But obviously there are spend thresholds where it absolutely is super important that that data be part of your data warehouse. And those thresholds should be different based on how much work it's going to be. So if there is a connector for your preferred EL tool and an open source DBT package, the spend threshold should be way, way lower. In this hypothetical company, it's 100,000. If you spend more on marketing, maybe it's higher. If you're really fast at this stuff, maybe it's lower. If there's a connector but no DBT package, it should be a little bit higher of a spend threshold. And if there's no connector available, you should have a much higher spend threshold. And this should actually affect what your marketing team chooses to test out. So let's say your marketing team, they know that in H2, they want to test out both Pinterest ads and Reddit ads. But they don't have any strong preference between the two of them. Like if one of them has a open source DBT package, that should affect which one they test first, because that's going to be super easy to integrate if it does well. Another thing to save money is, of course, open source tools. So I haven't used all of these, and I don't endorse any particular ones, but these are some of the open source data tools that are available. Obviously, DBT is super standard, but every category that of data tool has some open source option. So for ingestion, you've got Ebrey. For web analytics, you've got a ton of options, which is great because a lot of companies right now are moving off of Google Analytics Universal Analytics. And Google's trying to get them on Google Analytics 4, which, may be right for you, but there's a lot of good open source options. BI's got Lightdash, and for orchestration, there's Airflow and Prefect. I'm sure there's a lot more. So definitely sound off in the chat if there's an open source tool that you liked. But picking one or two of these, if it does all of the features that you need, can be a great way to save money. And even they all have managed versions, but even those are often cheaper than the companies that don't have an open source version. So, for example, like your managed Snowplow or RudderStack is still going to be cheaper than Google Analytics. Oh yeah, Metabase is another good one, actually, Trevor. I've used that as well. Also, in addition to open source, take advantage of cheap pricing from Series A and B companies. I heard a great pitch at the Snowflake Summit that was like, use us, we're still Series A. It was from Continual, actually. When you order an Uber or you get Postmates, you're letting a VC subsidize your personal transportation and dining. You should do the same thing at your work. Like let VCs subsidize, your business. One of the projects that we did at Omaze was like, we basically built our own very simple version of like what Monte Carlo does. It took us months and it was a cool project. But we probably should have just let a VC subsidize that project, especially if we were doing it today. I would definitely want to take advantage of that. Another thing with vendors is like be very realistic about what you actually have time to do. It is so easy to get excited by all the cool tools out there, especially when you're going to conferences, and sign up for the next one before you've actually extracted all the value you can get out of your current tools. And that's a really bad use of resources, especially in a downturn. Now that I've started this consulting business, I absolutely have companies coming to me that are saying things like, we've had Looker for 2 years, but everyone's still on Tableau. Or they're saying, we keep on rolling over our Snowflake credits because we haven't actually got around to setting it up yet. And like, that's just a waste of resources that, now in a time when CTOs have huge budgets, like it's not a big deal, but like CFOs are absolutely going to be like, why are we paying for this tool that you haven't used in 2 years? So make sure you start your contracts when you realistically have time to integrate a new vendor. Another thing is when you can't afford to hire, think about training someone up. So like a little bit of salary research that I've done. I don't know if this is still totally up to date, but like, analytics engineers tend to get paid more than data analysts. And there may be like a great junior analyst that you work with that like isn't ready to be promoted to a senior analyst because she's, not, can't present to like CMOs yet. She's still a little shy. But she's great at SQL. Like, you could probably teach her, things like TBT and LookML and have her be a proper analytics engineer. People tend to like do a job for, like 6 months to a year before they start getting paid for it. So, take advantage of that sort of salary arbitrage that is also good for them too, because you're teaching them a valuable skill, and train people up for the jobs you need. Another thing is I haven't seen as much recently teaching of like traditional data engineers working as analytics engineers and working on things like DBT, LookML, Census. And part of that is that like traditional data engineers in America often make pretty high salaries. But those economics are different if you're looking at offshore. So I've had some great success with like hiring, traditional data engineers in India, teaching them DBT and LookML, and like having them contribute a ton to our projects. There's also more affordable engineering available in Eastern Europe and South America. Um, and there are some challenges to this. You definitely need someone in your company's time zone that's like gathering requirements, meeting with stakeholders. But we are seeing some companies now hiring data product managers, which is great for gathering requirements. Um, and we also see, and even if you don't have one of those, your head of data probably needs to do those things as well, meet with stakeholders. So that could be a good option for you too. And then you don't have to just save data team money. You can also save money for other teams and try your best to quantify it. So, for example, if you're at a small startup, maybe your marketing team is just optimizing ads based on the Google Ads UI, which is heavily biased in favor of Google, of course. So let's say you set up a data warehouse, you set up some reporting and attribution, and that brings the true CAC of your ads, down by $5. Um, that's a huge win. That's going to save a lot of money. To plug the conference, let's say you set up some operational analytics tools, start sending some dynamic audiences to Google Ads. Maybe that brings your CAC down even more, and marketing's really happy. That could add up to a lot of money. And then, think about just like traditional analytics is about making good decisions. So, there's always money that would have been spent on a new feature or a new product line or something that maybe data shows that we shouldn't actually spend that money on it. And so that could be a huge money saver as well. These things are definitely hard to quantify, but the act of trying to quantify them is going to bring you like way closer to your stakeholders. So for example, like I hate to say this, but like let's say you go to marketing and you're like, hey, we designed this data warehouse for you. We set up all these reports. Like, how much has your CAC gone down? And they're like, actually, it's only gone down by like 50 cents or something. I mean, that's a bummer, but it's good to know that, and that will hopefully help you iterate on what you built to actually deliver value, rather than just assuming that, oh yeah, we probably did a great job. So like I wouldn't focus so much on like getting quantifying this down to the cent, and I would focus way more on just the act of making sure that you're delivering value, having a rough idea of that, and getting closer to your stakeholders. And that's all that I have. But I'm super curious about other, suggestions people have, tools they've tried, tactics, and hopefully this has been helpful.
Hey, we're back. Sorry about that. Just trying to put my question in the chat before I got up here. I'm up. We got uh, Ishkarsh. Hopefully I said that correctly. Is just well. First, let me introduce the poll. Is your company currently looking to reduce data team budget? Gosh, we have to ask all these tough questions out here. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Um, and lucky for three of you, the answer is no to that. You're probably still on that Series A VC funding money. And then there's the other two of you that are facing the the reality of life right now. So Ishkarsh's question: as a data analyst by design, I have worked with DBT for analytics engineering. In the current data industry, is knowing DBT sufficient for an analytics engineer role?
Uh, I would certainly apply to most analytics engineer roles. Some of them may say, "Oh, we also want Python and R," but it may not be a hard requirement for them. People vary a lot based on whether they apply to jobs if they meet all the criteria versus whether they apply to jobs if they meet half the criteria. And I think, generally speaking, it's better to just apply to all the jobs that you meet half the criteria for. Certainly, at Omaze, people that just know DBT can be very valuable. So it would not be a blocker to me if you only knew DBT.
I think if there was one role these days where you could apply with like less qualifications than is necessary, and to your point, learn on the job if you have the right people around you, and that's definitely got to be one of them. So I think great answer. Also, like just generally encouraging people to like take that leap, especially if you have that doubt. Like do it. Worst thing that happens is you waste a little time on your resume, but like you can do it at really
Yeah, I mean, don't lie, but just be like, hey,
nice.
I've found that I've delivered great value with just DBT. And ask them like, what are the things that you found that you need R for or whatever. And if they have a great answer, be like, okay, maybe I'm not a good fit. But if they don't have a
Yeah.
great answer, be like, I think you should hire me.
Awesome. Put the onus on them. Just good time to plug OA, our Slack community. It does have a data jobs channel. So if you're looking and you have a skill set, there's people also who are looking on the other side of the equation. Of course, locally optimistic DBT also have great places to find and provide work for folks. Um, but just don't hire Steven because he's going to work with us. So just kidding. Hire Steven. He needs more stuff to do this summer. Second question: how do you balance the effort of quantifying your value versus providing value? This is, I think, one of those questions where Jessica Cherney yesterday talked about like promoting your work and being visible and stuff, but like that takes time. That's a resource that costs. How do you evaluate that versus just like getting shit done?
Yeah, I think part of this is I wish there was even better analytics on analytics. I think some BI tools have some. Looker has some, but Tableau has a little bit. I wish it was a little more sophisticated because it is so important that we make sure that what we build is actually used. And so I would think, to me, quantifying like cost savings is really like a subset of just quantifying impact. Um, and you absolutely need to balance how much time we spend building versus how much time do we spend evangelizing and meeting with stakeholders. I think one thing I was talking with someone recently, last night actually at the OA happy hour, who was like, yeah, we spent all this time and I feel like people still are like not that self-serve. And I think that's a common thing that like nobody ever feels like we have achieved self-serve. It's always like a goal to get to. It's very similar to me and to the way that software development teams are like always like, we're not agile yet, but like if we just try a little bit harder, we'll be more agile. Like for data, it's like if we just try a little bit harder, we'll be more self-serve.
That's really
And
good.
so yeah, I think you have to use what analytics or even qualitative research you can do to see if people are actually using what you build. And
Mhm.
if it's not what you like, I would only build. I would only think about basically your goal is impact. And so if you can drive more impact by sitting with people and saying, hey, this is how you use Looker or Tableau or Sigma, or like this is how you set up a census sync,
Yeah,
than actually building a new feature, then like you should spend more time on that.
yeah.
If you're trying to sit with people and they're like, I can't use what you built because you don't have these three data sources, then you should spend your time on integrating those data sources.
Best advice. I mean, yeah, I think there's this tied again with Jessica Cherney's advice of making yourself uncomfortable doing the things that just aren't the easy thing to do, but are going to have the greater impact, show your value. But like, yeah, knowing what your stakeholders are, who they are, and how they create impact, and how you create impact on behalf of them is brilliant advice. If you, just curious from your experience, this is a personal experience question. What is the biggest impact project that you've ever done within data or adjacent that might be interesting for this audience?
Mm. Um, One that was like pretty cool was I was working in ad tech, and we had a complaint from sales that their new ad campaigns were ramping up too slowly. That like, hey, we told this advertiser we can spend $10,000 a day of your money delivering 5,000 installs of your app, and like we're not spending that money, we're not delivering those installs. So I went and talked to the data science team, and they were like, well, how are we supposed to ramp them up until we have actual performance like data on where those ads are performing? Like we can't just
Right.
ramp up based on nothing. So it's one
Yep.
of these cases where like to sales it's obvious, like how can you, we have clients that want to spend money, how can we not take their money? To data science it's obvious, like, oh well, how can we ramp up ads when we have no idea where they're going to perform? um, and we actually found a compromise that kind of worked out for everyone, which was we were doing a lot of mobile game ads, and we used a language processing algorithm to determine which new games were similar to old games that we had already advertised. So like mobile games are like not that original, so you might launch like a new farming game
Right.
that has farming and crops and tap your farm, like all those words are in the app store description. You
Sure.
analyze that, it's very similar to the words in an existing farming game that we've already advertised, and we already know exactly which
How it
apps those
performs.
ads perform well in.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's just start by sending those ads to the places that similar games perform well in. And then once we have actual data on where it performs, then we can optimize towards actuals. But like, let's at least optimize towards our best
Good.
guess at first.
Yeah, I mean, who says data people aren't creative? That's a really clever idea. Stephen, that's I think all the time we have here. Really enjoyed like we luckily will be able to share these recordings after. So much good advice. There's a lot I think that's worth rewatching, very pertinent now and probably well into the future. Next up on the stage is a man named Juan Cicada. He is an honest, no BS guy. I'm swearing it on his shirt, and you'll soon see that. And so we're going to be back in about 30 seconds. So thanks again, Stephen, and I appreciate all your wisdom and part upon us. And we'll be right back.